Joining us now, the co-host of the Gojo and Golic podcast, and you may know him from his just prolific candy and snack content that he's putting out on the internet. It is Mike Golic Jr. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. Appreciate you having me. And I found my one true calling in life. I always thought my dream was to be a football player, and then I crapped out after a certain point in that. Thought it might be broadcaster after that, but the candy lane has really been a nice home. So I appreciate you still letting me talk about football, even though it's clearly not the expertise.
You went to Japan like a month after I did.
Yes.
And I should have warned you about the amount of Kit Kat varieties that are available when you go to Japan. There's a store in Japan. It's pretty much in every city. It's like a Walmart adjacent store called Don Quixote, and they have like 1,000 varieties of Kit Kats. Like I can't even describe to you the granularity of the flavors that are available. And I knew I could have counted on you to try every single one of them.
Every last one of them. And you're right, the granularity, but also the overwhelming accuracy and loyalty to the flavor they're trying. I didn't know Baskin Robbins was so big over there. One of the Kit Kat flavors is just straight up Baskin Robbins strawberry ice cream. And I've never been transported to an actual good that the Kit Kat's trying to replicate the way I have for that. It's the Don Quixote in general. First off, you did an outstanding job with some recommendations for restaurants, so I owe you a very public thank you for that.
Happy to do it. It's my lane.
The Don Quixote having a full-on thrift store on the couple of top levels where you can buy like refurbished and reused handbags and all that stuff. What an incredible building.
It's absolutely insane. The one we went to in Osaka, my wife was just horrified by the lines and the entire vibe of the whole thing. The slight differences in some of the Kit Kat flavors. There's a matcha one, but there's also a matcha latte one, and they're just a little bit different. Like it's a little bit creamier. And the one that was crazy to me is they're in a lot of Japanese baked goods. They'll do this like red bean paste that they'll put in, certain cookies and certain they do these little fish shaped baked goods that you can buy at various street markets. And the subtle difference in how sweet and savory the strawberry and red bean Kit Kat was from the normal strawberry one, I was like, these guys got it figured out. I don't know how they do it, but these guys got it figured out.
I also don't know, and this is a larger tangent just about the way that fast food companies and candy companies outsource all of their best stuff to other countries. Like the best version of McDonald's does not exist in the state. I saw a mile-long Taco Bell line at the Tokyo Dome for a baseball game there, because I'm sure they've got something freaky in there too when it comes to the menu items. But you're right, the Kit Kats, how have we missed out on red bean paste for so long? That stuff is a delightful addition to the dessert repertoire out there. It's somewhere between a chocolate and a compote, and I can't figure out what it's more, but it's wonderful.
It's just making me want to go back. The Cubs are opening their against the Dodgers, and I'm like already looking up how I can get a flight and what the secondhand watch market is looking like when I get back over there. So very excited and had a great time, and I'm sure you did as well. All right, we're doing this. It is July 18th. This is coming out on July 19th. I leave for training camp in 2 days. Training camp starts in 4 days. And we're going to do a show that we've done every single year on this podcast because I just think it's a great table setter for training camp getting started. We're going to run through our biggest questions that we have on the eve of training camp. Each of us came with, I don't know, I always say like 4 or 5. I always come with like 8. But I asked you to come with, I think, 4 of them. So we're going to run through ours. You are the guest here. I'm going to let you kick this off. What is the question you started with that you are most looking forward to as training camps kick off?
The one I started with, because I tried to think about these in terms of, even if they were questions about individual teams, ones that could have a larger ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And the one I kind of started with was, how does the Ravens defense follow this up? Like what we saw last year, considering the brain drain, especially on the staff on that side of the ball, where Mike McDonald's obviously in Seattle now, Anthony Weaver's down in Miami, Denard Wilson's in Tennessee, Zach Orr stepping up to replace that with a group that certainly lost talent on the field, right? With Geno Stone and Patrick Queen and a number of other players. I'm just fascinated because that defensive performance last year was one that had ripple effects throughout football. It was, from the neck up especially, a sort of Shanahan offensive-like effect on the way that people are starting to look at and think about defensive football. And so I'm fascinated by how that team, especially on that side of the ball, is going to be able to follow it up, because it's not like there aren't changes and things to talk about on offense, but I think the defense was such a big story and now is beginning to branch out that tree throughout the NFL as well.
It's a great one to bring up. And what Baltimore looks like, I think you can extend that to the personnel. Like, I'm curious, like, does Nate Wiggins start? And if Nate Wiggins starts, does that mean Marlon Humphrey is full-time in the slot? And does that mean Kyle Hamilton's a full-time safety now? Like, there are just so many layers to what that defense might look like. And I think the proliferation of that system is a great thing to bring up. You know, the fact that now it's something that everybody's seeking out. It's not an accident that Brian Callahan, who was with the Bengals for the last several years, wanted a defensive coordinator who was fluent in that system that he hated playing against. And one of my favorite things is, you know, the NFC West with Shanahan and McVay has been this little incubator of offensive ideas in the NFL for the last 5-6 years. Now with McDonald going over there, we get the Ravens-Rams game twice a year now. In terms of like football nerd bullshit, we get it twice a year forever as long as those two guys are there. So many different points of how the Ravens defensive system is going to affect the NFL this year. I think that's a great one to bring up.
No, it's exciting. You're right from the football nerd standpoint. The question's going to become, I think, much like we've seen in a lot of these like Shanahan offenses, everyone's got their sort of like interesting, whether it's a jack of all trade piece or a tight end that mixes it up. I'm excited to see like who these defenses employ in the Kyle Hamilton role, or, you know, how can you do this without a Roquan Smith at the center of your defense that unlocked so many other players for them? So going to be a ton of fun to watch. But yeah, that was where my brain went first.
It's a great point. And I think that we've seen this with the Shanahan offense where everyone has their flavor of it. You know, even McDaniel's offense looks different than Kyle's offense. McVay's offense looks different than other disciples he's had that have filtered around the league. So even McDonald, it's like he's not going to do the same things with Seattle that he did with Baltimore. Even if you think that Weatherspoon can be that guy where he can be used in a bunch of different ways, it's going to express differently. So how all of these guys express these ideas through their talent is 100% going to be something worth watching. My first one here, I want to just know what sort of indications do we get early on about when we'll see the rookie quarterbacks? Because I think with Chicago and Washington, it's pretty much a given those guys are going to play. I think Washington needs Jaden Daniels to play early. The Bears named Caleb Williams the starter on day one of the offseason program, which I kind of like that. I mean, it's much better than the Trevor Lawrence experience we went through a couple of years ago where he split reps in training camp with Gardner Minshew. You don't have to take it to that extreme, but I enjoyed the fact that there was no ambiguity about the fact that this was going to be the guy from day one. There are other situations that are a little bit muddier than that. You know, New England has come out and said Jacoby Brissett is the starter for right now. He's getting the majority of the reps with the first team. Does that continue? Like, if Drake May looks ridiculous in camp, and Drake May comes out and makes 5 crazy throws in his first preseason game, how long can they realistically keep him on the bench? I think probably the one that I'd bet on for the guy who's going to be on the sidelines the longest is JJ McCarthy in Minnesota. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Sam Darnold for a big chunk of this season for 2 reasons. 1, they paid him $10 million in free agency. 2, I think the Vikings believe there is some credence to that model where you sit your rookie quarterback for a little while. So I think with those 2 factors in mind, when do we see him? And I'll admit this, even when I was making this list, I always forget about Bo Nix. Like, Bo Nix is also a first-round starting quarterback that's a rookie, and we'll see when we see Bo Nix. So just the murmurs, the things that leak out, the initial impressions of these guys, that's going to be something I'm really excited to pay attention to as camp gets rolling.
No, I'm with you on that. It's fascinating because you're right. All of these situations are just a little bit different. Bo Nix was one of the ones as we were getting ready for this. I kind of had to remind myself, it's like, all right, Sean Payton is still back in the NFL coaching, and now he has hitched his wagon and his happiness to the 6th quarterback off the board in this last draft in a way that, like, I find myself constantly going, what is, like, Sean Payton, you came back for this? Like, all of these problems that you've now found yourself with is just a fascinating sidebar. But you're right with these rookie quarterbacks. I do think, and I heard Bill Barnwell talking about this on NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal, the Vikings' early season schedule also has to do a little bit with that, I think. Looking at it now, you know, you start off with the Giants, which is fine, but then San Francisco, Houston, Green Bay, the Jets, if they're online. Like, you could not only be facing some tough outs, but also some really tough defensive fronts early in that year. So not exposing Sam Darnold to that, if you can, or excuse me, not exposing JJ McCarthy to that early, if you can avoid it, probably good business.
I totally agree. The Broncos thing is so funny because when Sean Payton got there, I think everyone was pretty excited, right? This is a Super Bowl winning coach, somebody that had orchestrated top 10 offenses essentially every single year he was in New Orleans. And I'll admit this. I think that I was turned off by the way last year went in maybe too pronounced a way. I think that I've overreacted to how gross and uninteresting that team and that offense was last year. And I am not putting enough stock in Sean Payton's entire tenure as a play caller as I look forward to what this year's Broncos can be. And I look forward to what the Broncos can be overall as he really kind of gets to reshape that team and it's in his image. Because right now, like, I don't know, I'm not that excited about watching the Broncos. I'll admit that. And there's a chance I have to eat crow about that halfway into the season when he's doing some interesting shit with Bo Nix.
The Broncos really are like a case study in context because I feel like so many of us, it took so long for them to shake the stink off of giving up like 70 points early in the season last year for us to like recalibrate in the Broncos defense and all that stuff. So I'm with you. Boring all of a sudden made us downgrade what was objectively like coming off the worst year of Russell Wilson's career, getting it back to base camp where it was at least somewhat of a respectable performance deserves a lot more respect than it probably is getting.
I think that's the question is what sort of multiplier is Sean Payton really? Yeah. And did the state of Russell Wilson's career and just kind of that weird arranged marriage give us a skewed understanding of what he is at this stage of his career? I think the answer might be yes. And again, we're all just kind of clouded by how uninteresting that team was last year. And not just the stink of that 70 points, but the stink of the Russell Wilson trade. Like it was impossible to watch that team last year and not just have the dead money figure in your head every single time you watch that team play football. But now we're on the other side of that to an extent. They're still paying out the money, but we have a new quarterback in there. So a lot of things to potentially look forward to for Denver this year. What's your next one?
My next one, actually, I'll piggyback off that because it was on my list, but it was looking at the second-year quarterbacks because outside of C.J. Stroud, who burst onto the scene and obviously is the darling of so many of us, especially in media, because you couple the stellar play, the whole vibe switch with the franchise him and DeMeco Ryans were able to pull with an offseason media tour that really highlighted all the things that we love about him. I know, your buddy Nate Tice wrote about what CJ Stroud is as a passer, sort of a throwback guy, a lot more cerebral, what he does pre-snap, all of these things that aren't just predicated on athleticism being one of the bailouts there. But you look around right now at, all right, Tennessee and Will Levis, they have stocked the pond with weapons. We don't know if they're all perfect. We don't know if they fit together, but the same idea I think has existed for him and certainly Bryce Young, who was top of mind for me in thinking about this reclamation project where the Carolina Panthers went out and spent more money than God on an offensive line. They traded to get Xavier Legette in the draft for him. They brought Deontay Johnson over here. Dave Canales is this reclamation project artist at quarterback that he's being billed at right now. And so a lot of these franchises doing what we ask teams to do, which is sell out to try and put enough around your young quarterback to figure out quickly if they're the guy or not. And I think a lot of these teams have at least tried to put themselves in that position, whether or not they can execute it perfectly.
I almost put the Bryce Young and the Panthers on here because I think there's so many different layers to it. Dave Canales has done a great job over the last couple of years of reclamation project is right. Just kind of getting the best out of those guys. And I think correcting a lot of flaws. That was the most impressive part for me about watching him with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield is that some of those fatal flaws in both of those guys' game, notably just the sack taking and just how much of a problem that was. And the fact that they managed to kind of get over the hump with both of those guys there. What does he view as that fatal flaw with Bryce Young? Like, what is the number one thing they have to drill down on? And I don't know the answer. We've had some hypotheses about what it might look like and why. Do they spread it out a little bit more? Is there more empty where he can play point guard? Like, what are the solves for Bryce Young in year two and how they get the most out of him? I think is absolutely one of the biggest questions in the league. And for the Panthers, I think there are a lot of layers to this. They're right now with the way we saw guards get paid in free agency. I think that we're undergoing sort of a mini experiment about the value of interior players in the NFL. And I think we're going to see if those investments are worth it. What the Rams have done, what the Panthers have done, several other teams in the way they've played the interior of their lines. And you can make an argument that interior protection is more important than on the edges these days. And I think the Panthers are going to be a test case for that. What do the Panthers' weapons look like? Is the Xavier Legette Dante Johnson combo enough to unlock what Bryce Young is. So I think there are a dozen questions about the Panthers, and you could probably ask just as many about the rest of these second-year guys.
Yeah, well, and I think, too, Rick, recognizing it relative to your specific situation, too, in terms of that value in the interior, like, you got small, slight quarterback. Like, we talked about it all in the lead up to the draft, but for him especially, protection in that area. Now, they spent all that money on guard. Ike Ekwonu, who's their homegrown left tackle top pick from a couple of years ago, gave up more sacks than anybody in the NFL last year on his own. So, like, there are also things in there that you've got to figure out. I do think, sack taking, you mentioned how often he got hit last year. It's good that you have a guy who's used to figuring out the antidote for that, because you just got to stop getting hit so much so you can be upright long enough to develop anything resembling a good habit for a group that should be a little bit better at getting open than the Adam Thielen-led crew last year.
If you had to pick between Levis and Bryce Young, because I think everyone has a reasonable amount of confidence in the Colts infrastructure and what that's going to mean for Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, by the way, Jesus.
If you had to bet on Will Levis or Bryce Young coming out on the other side of this season with the majority of people feeling optimistic about where that arrow was pointed, which one would you pick?
Oh, God. I think just because I'll say twofold. I'll say the Titans and Levis, one, because he's just built like a tractor trailer, but also you saw a few flickers of it last year, even if I don't think long-term Will Levis is necessarily going to be like a long-term answer for the Titans. But also, I can't underscore what it means to get Bill Callahan over as a part of your organization, to have that group molding the line in front of him, helping design the run game for that outfit now, and what we've seen him do at multiple stops along the way. You've started to build the house in the right way with the person holding the tools, and I think that's going to help him a lot up front to stay clean enough long enough. Again, Dave Canales has a well-worn reputation, like you mentioned, of helping put these guys in some good scenarios, but I just think the Titans might be closer to that. And defensively as well, that's the other part with Carolina, is so many quality defensive pieces walked out the door for them last year that I don't know if they're going to get as much help as last year's group did from that side of the football.
I'm fascinated by what the Titans offense is going to look like, period, because even though Brian Callahan comes from Cincinnati, I think we've got a lot of evidence that shows us it's going to look more like the Jake Browning version of the Bengals offense from last year than the Joe Burrow offense from last year. And the fact that that's even an option, I think, speaks to the job that Cincinnati staff did with Jake Browning. The fact that they could change, I can't believe I'm about to do this, change their stripes midstream in the way that they did, I think was very impressive. But that, I think, really shows the flexibility and kind of how deep the bag is for somebody like Brian Callahan. And we'll see if that can extend to when he is the play caller and he's kind of the architect of this for the first time in his entire NFL career. So that week one kickoff and what the Titans are going to look like and what the Panthers are going to look like, two of the things that I'm going to be watching very, very closely. All right. It is time now for a segment delivered to you by Pizza Hut called The Taste of Chicago. Chicago Tavern-style pizza is the true pizza of Chicago, not that deep dish stuff. That's for tourists. So what does the Chicago Bears offense look like under Shane Waldron, and how does Caleb Williams look in it? Like, this is not only one of the biggest questions I think about the NFL, but one of the biggest questions for my happiness and mental health over the next year to 5 years. So, I mean, there's so many different layers to this. If you think about what the Seattle offense looked like under Waldron over the last couple of years, it didn't look the way that you might have thought based on his history with the Rams. You know, they played in these super wide formations. You know, the running game was structurally very different than what the Rams were doing over the last couple of years. The way that they use DK Metcalf, where he's kind of on one side of the field, split out to the left out wide. Like, I don't know how many of those ideas you can necessarily or should necessarily graft onto what the Bears offense is and how to use that personnel. And if you look at even the staff, like Chris Morgan comes back as their run game coordinator and offensive line coach. So what does the run game look like? And is there a better marriage between the way Waldron wants to throw the ball and the way they want to run the ball? Thomas Brown is coming over as the passing game coordinator. So do we see more Ram-centric stuff in the way that LA looked over those last couple of years? Like, I truly don't know what it's going to look like and what it should look like. And I think that leaves a lot of questions about how comfortable Caleb Williams is going to be and what sort of offense he's going to be piloting. So I'm very, very curious about just the structure of this thing as we get going.
Yeah, all the noise of the Caleb Williams conversation about business practices off the field and all that stuff finally giving way to what the actual ball is going to look like is going to be a welcome respite. But you're right, like personnel-wise, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on there. You know, the tight end room, they paid Cole Kmet all that money. Gerald Everett's over there now to go along with the wide receiver room that would have been the envy of anyone involved with the Justin Fields era of this offense. So
that's another question. How much 11 personnel do we even see? Because when Waldron was in Seattle, they were using multiple tight ends all the time. Is that because they had protection issues? Is that the way he wants to live? Like, I just have so many questions about who he wants to be and why he wants to be that. And we won't know until they actually put the pads on, start lining up and figuring it out.
The 12 personnel one was the most interesting to me because I remember reading during the season about how much of that was a Pete Carroll directive at that point with what they wanted, and how much of that was Pete going back to his old ways saying, hey, I'd rather condense this down. I would rather lean on the things that I'm familiar with versus what Shane actually wanted to do with that. So again, it seems like he's got the bodies to sort of be whatever version of him we've seen. And so I guess it'll be twofold. You know, one, thinking about Caleb and the world that he comes from playing with Lincoln, which is, you know, if you forget the nature of the offense, which draft people found out and really disliked during the course of that season, what college football people had seen for a while about that like RPO dart centric version of that offense, but just the general spacing, how much 4 and 5 wide they're doing there, and what Caleb is used to and how they want to marry that with what Shane's DNA actually is at this point.
And that's another huge question. Like, how much RPO stuff do we see? Because that's not the world that Waldron comes from necessarily. So just every single layer and how they try to fold that stuff in, definitely be worth watching. And then the other Bears thing, it's kind of adjacent to this, is I'm just curious about how the offensive line shakes out, right? Like, so they sign Coleman Shelton in free agency. They bring in Ryan Bates via trade. You know, do both of those guys start? Is Nate Davis the odd man out? Do we get Ryan Bates at center, or is Coleman Shelton just the depth piece? So a lot of questions, and I think worthwhile questions about a Bears offense that a lot of people are excited about. If you want to try our spin on thin crust that's full of flavor, airy, crispy, and packed with new recipes, try Pizza Hut's Chicago Tavern Style. All right, what's your next one here?
My next one, I'll actually stay in division there, and I'll look at the Lions. Did the Lions do enough in the secondary, especially, to go and stay within striking distance of San Francisco? Like, are we going to again be able to talk about them as one of the true NFC contenders to go and win the Super Bowl? I know, you know, our friends at FTN and Aaron Schatz and those guys all talk about how difficult it is in this league to hold offensive production year over year, the way the Lions have the last couple of years. You bring back Ben Johnson and all the same parts of the coaching staff and Aaron Glenn that give you the continuity to hold this thing over, but with last year, how the injuries mounted up early with Mosley and CJ Gardner-Johnson, to now the young pieces you continue to add, you know, half an Alabama secondary sitting in there in year 1 and 2, helping you out with Terry and Arnold and what Brian Branch was for you last year. Can that be enough? Because they're still not going to have opposite Aiden Hutchinson enough pass rush juice, I think, up front to offset that. So those working in tandem, can the secondary offset that enough to help them keep pace with really Green Bay in that division as this team that's nipping at their heels already?
It's a great one. And I think with the Lions, I think there's a couple spots on the roster where, okay, is their patience and measured approach to each of these positions, is that justified, or is that going to come back to bite them? And I think that you can say that for the other edge spot, and I think you could say that for the other outside receiver spot. Do they have the bodies in-house to take this thing where they want to take it? And it's interesting because, you know, DJ Reader's there now. So is he enough of a multiplier along that defensive front to get more from that group and get enough from that group to take them to that place? Is the secondary, was it such a problem last year that if they get that right, it's all systems go, wheels up, full steam ahead? I have no idea, but those seem to be the bets that they're making based on the moves that they made this offseason.
Yeah, I am fascinated. You mentioned DJ Reader going over there. The combination of him and Aleem McNeil, who, when he was back in that lineup late in the last season and the postseason, total difference maker, like complete difference maker along the interior, with Aiden Hutchinson on the end, who, again, I talked about FTN before. This stat was wild to me. Aiden Hutchinson led the NFL last year with 78 pressures, which was 55 more than the next closest Lions defender. Like, he is everything they've ever wanted, and he's standing around doing the Kevin Hart help me.
I really enjoy as we look at just the way that teams around the league are trying to build physical football teams. And I think that it's something I've been talking with coaches about recently, just because I do think that there is a gap between the teams that can really tap into that physicality and the teams that can't. And if we look at practice times and just the types of coaches that are in charge of these teams now, we've gotten to this place where we have these like 35-year-old head coaches who are like letting their guys play without pads half the time. It's like, okay, like this is still a physical game. So how do you maintain that balance? I love the Lions' commitment to like every single person that we bring into this building for the most part is just an ass kicker. Like, we're going to bring in DJ Reader because he fits the type of team we want to be and he fits the type of vibe that we're going for. And we're not just going to bring in some other bendy pass rusher on the other side because you guys think that we should. Like, there's a certain bar you have to clear to play football here. And if you can't, then we're not interested in you. The bets that they've made in that area to this point have benefited them. So we'll see if that continues to happen.
Yeah, the spine-based football, that going all the way back to our original point, talking about the Baltimore Ravens and this bet down the middle for them, that's really been up both sides of the ball for this Detroit Lions team. It's ass kickers all throughout these positions down the middle of it to see if they can still win football by just beating the hell out of you.
Let's stay in the NFC North, because really one of the only team-centric ones that I had, I'm curious about like some position battles in Green Bay. Like, this is a team that I think has real justified Super Bowl aspirations and at least playoff aspirations based on the way that last year went. But a couple of these spots for them are a little bit unsettled. They draft Jordan Morgan in the first round. Does he start? Where does he start? Is he the left tackle? Is he the right guard? Who are their best 5 offensive linemen? How quickly during camp do we figure that out? What happens in the secondary? It seems like every single year, we want to have optimism about somebody like Eric Stokes. And Matt LaFleur this spring, he was like, listen, he looks as good as he's ever looked. He's healthy. It's kind of a knock on wood sort of situation. But if they can get Jair Alexander back, if they can get Stokes back, they have Valentine as depth now. They go out and draft Javon Bullard and Edgerrin Cooper in the second round. Do we see both of those guys in the lineup early on? How many of these defensive pieces are unlocked by Jeff Hafley coming in there? So there are a lot of questions for Green Bay, despite being a team that I think a lot of people consider to be a contender. They're not scary questions, but there's enough that's unsettled about that team that I think I'm paying more attention to some of their personnel decisions than some of the other teams that are firmly in that contender status.
I know. I think we've been so enamored thinking about the offense and, the youngest group of skill players in the NFL and the Jordan Love step forward that happened last year. Jeff Hafley coming over, to me, is going to be a fascinating subplot to all this, because everything he represents defensively is not really what's in vogue in the NFL right now. But when you look at the pieces that they've got in this group, especially up front, like adding Edgerrin Cooper into this group, where Jeff Hafley, going all the way back to when he was at Ohio State as the coordinator, before he got to BC, where like obviously they're undermanned in terms of talent, and in the modern version of college football where you've got to do all this stuff and the resource race has never been more valuable, like they were always probably going to fall behind. His defense is even still there. It was, I'm going to put bodies around the line of scrimmage and we're going to raise hell. Like, they are a havoc team when I think of Jeff Hafley and what he wants to do. And he's got pieces that they've drafted over the last few years in that group that can create havoc when weaponized in that way. And so combine that with the single high stuff, and it's just going to be really interesting to see what that side of the ball that's been the complaint for so many Packers fans for the last couple seasons looks like under him.
Hearing the players talk about how much they've enjoyed him being there, I think that says a lot, because of course you want to play like that. If you're a defensive player, of course you want to play like that. You're a defensive lineman, and your job now is just rush the quarterback and stop the run on the way to the quarterback. That's exactly how you want to play. And I've said this at least a couple times over the last couple weeks, and this is a drum I'll continue to beat up until we get to the season. If I'm going to pick a team that, not to the same degree, because I don't think they're going to be the best defense in the league, but can make like a diet version of the jump that the Browns did last year, because they're undergoing such a stylistic shift from one mindset to the other, and they have the requisite amount of talent to be really good. I think the Packers are a very good candidate for something like that to happen, because if you have the bodies up front, and you have the difference makers up front and the guys who can influence the game, and you deploy them in the correct way, it can go a long, long way. And I do think that they have that sort of group with their front four, and this system feels like the right way to potentially unlock those guys. And if you're unlocking those guys at the start of it, I think there's a trickle-down effect to a back seven that, in my opinion, has enough talent to justify what's going on the front.
Yep, this kind of approach defensively, for anyone that doesn't know, I played offensive line in college, and it gives me anxiety to think about, because defenders that have only that one thing to consider are terrifying when you've got, especially like you said, the kind of athletes that are in their front four. Like there are, penetrators and pluggers basically when it comes to defensive linemen, right? Depending on the system, depending on what you're asked to do. And the guys that are spending their time trying to backdoor, trying to arm over, trying to get upfield and tear ass off the football are the ones that give you the most anxiety, because it's just like playing out on the perimeter. Speed's the number one thing you've got to think about first. Strength is terrifying in its own way, but in part for me, it's easier to work around. Blocking Vince Wilfork, still probably not the easiest day in the office, but it's at least a little bit more like, all right, I know what I'm in for, than me potentially holding onto my ass and looking in the backfield while some guy's eating my friends alive, between the running back and quarterback.
I just like the amount of different skill sets they have and the different flavors they have, right? Because Van Ness and Gary especially, like those guys are just pocket crushers. Like they've got a lot of size on the outside. TJ Slayton is a player that I think really came along last year. I thought he had flashes in his first couple seasons. He's more of that plugger that you're talking about, but it's still nice to have that skill set in the mix. But then when you combine that with a Kenny Clark and a Carl Brooks, and I think Wooden showed some stuff last year, like that's when you're playing this style of defense, you need those waves of guys. You need two hockey lines full of players, because you don't want them to be playing more than 60% of the snaps or so. And you want the play style to be at the forefront. You want to be able to tell those guys, hey, I'm going to give you enough of a break where you're going to have to play a certain way every single time you're out there. And they can do that. There's no imagination necessary. Like you don't have to stretch yourself too thin to properly deploy these guys in the type of defense that they want to play. And that's why I'm excited to actually watch it in practice.
Going to be awesome. All right. For my last one here, I hate that I'm pulling the ripcord on this, but I cannot ignore the actual fascination. I understand first take watchers, look away. You've seen this ad nauseum over the summer. I get we talk about the Cowboys too much, but what happens with Dak Prescott is one of those things that's going to have such massive ripple effects that I cannot ignore it. If they're going to let him walk into the season and just play it out on the final year, we're talking about first off, this season, for the Cowboys that have an awful skill group outside of CeeDee Lamb there, questions about the run game, questions about if Mike Zimmer is going to be able to come in and help stop the run in a way they haven't been able to. All those things for a team that's done nothing but win 12 games and be in regular season contention for the last few years. But now you're talking about the potential of Dak Prescott to do like Kirk Cousins style contract math coming off this. If he actually gets to free agency, who would then be in the market of some of these teams? It's all wild to me.
What do you think happens if you had to make a bet on it right now?
If I had to bet on it right now, I think if anyone's crazy enough to just let him play out this final year and see, it's Jerry Jones. And they seem, for whatever, I look at this as they've got some of the same doubts that we all do about the rest of that roster. And I think part of them are wondering of why, are we really going to keep throwing money after this problem to try and address this in a way that maybe we don't think is possible for this current roster, and just hard sell. I didn't think Jerry would do it originally because Jerry's getting old, and I thought selfishly he wanted to try and get back to this mountaintop before, forget football mortality, but real life mortality starts to creep into this. But it really seems like they have expressed in the way that they have built this team and gone about it doubts enough about this roster where I think he might actually let him walk in without that contract extension.
And on the other side of it, if anybody's going to be willing to kind of not blink and see this out, it's Dak and his people. Mm-hmm. Like there are two quarterbacks that have played the game exactly the way that they should at every single turn financially over the last 7 years or so. And it is Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott. They've exercised every bit of leverage that they have. They have really taken it to the end every single time in a way that few players and few quarterbacks are. But I think that we have enough history that shows us if you're a quarterback at a certain level and you want to exert that leverage, you can. Like, it is worth doing. Dak, when he didn't take the contract before, or when he was just willing to take the tag a couple times, the question is always, well, what if you get hurt? What if you get hurt? He broke his leg and then still got the contract that he wanted. When you're a certain level of quarterback, it just doesn't matter. So I think on both sides of this, there might be the requisite ingredients for each of them to take it the distance in a way that we don't typically see with quarterback organization dynamics. So I think that's a great one. And I'm fascinated by a lot of things going on with that team. And I think that you can extend it to a couple of these other quarterback contracts. Does Jordan Love just get paid? Does Jordan Love just get the Trevor Lawrence deal or something that's a slight markup on that after, I love Jordan Love, but 8 good games in the back half of last season? Like, is that enough? And I think what do the Dolphins do with Tua is another one that I cannot wait to see what their answer is. I had a head coach yesterday that I was talking to, and he just said, would you pay Tua if you were the Dolphins? And I'll keep the answer private, but that it's on the minds of people around the NFL even that aren't even involved in that discussion. I think because it is such an interesting football experiment based on his success and trying to divorce his success from what they've been able to do there schematically.
Yep. It's been this offseason a real exercise in, all right, what's the range quarterbacks have to be in for us to just say, sure, you set the market in some way, shape, or form next. And we know there's a bunch of clever math that teams can do, whether it's average per year, whether it's guaranteed money, how it's structured to make every agent and player feel good about themselves when they lay their head down at night. But one way or another, you're getting like your $5 million pay dump over whatever the last quarterback got there. And how far is that the 12th, 13th, 14th best quarterback in the NFL? And that seems to be the range we're going to get to before we get to the final boss next year with what happens with Brock Purdy after all the discourse.
It's funny. I don't know. I guess I can pull this out now, pull this out of the quiver. I think I'm more comfortable paying Brock Purdy than I am paying Tua. Like, I really do think that Brock Purdy and some of the unique elements to his game, the off schedule things, some of the pocket movement, the scrambling, like, I think there are more components to who Brock Purdy is that are aligned with elite quarterbacking in the NFL in 2024 than there are with Tua. Like, I do firmly believe that. So the fact that, we were having this question about Tua, I think that I'm maybe a little bit more open to it with Purdy when we do get there, even if I think there's plenty of downside and plenty of danger in paying somebody like that $55 million a year.
I would agree. I think all of this also goes back to, and we've talked about this more and more as a football watching culture lately, but just the importance of environment on quarterback development in all these ways. And Brock Purdy has always been in this, maybe the way he exactly came into it and all the circumstances surrounding it with Jimmy G and all those other things, but he's been in an environment in terms of the football atmosphere in San Francisco that's going to be conducive to you developing the best possible habits, having all the best possible things around you in terms of what to use. And for Tua, for Trevor Lawrence, for a bunch of these quarterbacks that came out, had to go through coaching changes and had to do a full mental rewiring in addition for Tua, the catastrophic injury he suffered at the end of his college career. I think you started to see more of the, all right, well, that's not just the Shanahan, McVay, McDaniels stuff out of Tua last year in certain instances, the stuff that you talk about that's a little bit different with Purdy compared to one of his predecessors like Jimmy G. But I do think you can take some of that back to Tua's had to do a lot of work just to get back to base camp based on the way he started before versus Brock Purdy, who wound up in a great situation, but has absolutely maximized it in a lot of ways that will make him deserving when it finally comes.
There's no doubt. All right, I got a couple more here that we can run through pretty quickly. We've alluded to a couple of these situations, but what do the first-year offenses actually look like? So we talked about the Titans and what Will Levis is going to look like with Brian Callahan, but what do Kellen Moore's Eagles look like? We've all seen that line about 95% of the offense being different. What does it actually look like structurally? Is there going to be more motion? Is there going to be more passes to the running back? How do they use Saquon in a Kellen Moore offense? That is a huge question for me. I cannot wait to see what the Ryan Grubb Seahawks look like. Like Geno
Yes.
in that offense with that skill position talent. I pray that the offensive line holds up well enough for us to get the most out of that, because I think that system, with the way that Geno wants to play and the pass catching talent that they have, that is a chance to be fireworks if they get a certain baseline level of play up front. What do Arthur Smith's Steelers look like? Right? Dude. Like, what do they even look like? Because you have this offense that they want to attack the middle of the field. It's all under center play action. There are two quarterbacks who don't want to play that way. Last year, they ran more wide zone than any team in the league, but you could make an argument that the Steelers offense looked best when they were pulling Broderick Jones. So, like, are those ideas a little bit too disparate to actually come out on the other side, like a cohesive vision that's well suited to the players? I have no idea. And there are like 5 more of them. What do Alex Van Pelt's Patriots look like? What do the Liam Cohen Bucks look like as they go to that sort of offense? Clint Kubiak going to New Orleans. So this is the storyline every year. It feels like we have 10 new offensive play callers every season now, but there are a bunch of them this year that I find particularly compelling based on the quarterbacks and the situations that we're looking at.
Hearing you say it out loud too, it really, like, you could just sort of circle that around the NFC South, like this division that we laughed out of the gym last year, where you've got all these new play callers coming in right now. And to your point, like, wildly different styles.
There's 4 new play callers in NFC South. Yeah, it's so true. And like the Zach Robinson Falcons. Like, is it just all systems go for Kirk Cousins in that offense? Like, do we get the most out of a Drake London and a Kyle Pitts? So I'm very excited.
Bijan Robinson too, in an offense where all of the Rams DNA going back to Todd Gurley, and then in a very different way last year with Kyron Williams now, has certainly featured that position in a variety of ways. Like, are we finally going to get more than just cool Skycam highlights of Bijan Robinson making cuts?
Yeah, that one's very exciting. I mean, there's just a bunch of them. Unfortunately, I'm not doing the Southeast on my training camp travels because I was in Tennessee and in Nashville right after the draft, and then I went to visit with the Falcons in June. So it's just like, it's hard to justify the trip all the way back down there. And if I can avoid Miami in early August, I'm going to potentially do that. So a lot of factors influencing that one.
Wise decision. As someone that once had to spend a week practicing in Miami in early January and still was stunned at the way it made my body feel, that is smart business on your part, man.
I think I've gone down there each of the last 2 years, and I can't even describe to you what it's like. You walk out of the car on July 29th and just your sunglasses instantly fog up. Like, I'm sweating the moment I exit the vehicle, and the humidity is 98%. So you never stop sweating. Like, there's just no way to handle it. There's no way to combat it. So congratulations to Marcel Louis-Jacques and all those guys that cover the Dolphins down there. But I'm gonna pass on that one this year. All right, couple more very quickly for me. Who are Jim Harbaugh's Chargers? Right? Like, fucking Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of the Chargers. Like, it's easy to forget this despite how much attention we paid to it in the moment. Like, what does the offense look like? What does the defense look like? The last 2 times we saw Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, his quarterbacks were Colin Kaepernick and Lamar Jackson. It's going to have to look different with Justin Herbert, I assume. But what does that mean? Right? Like, I mean, you assume that they're going to lean into the run game, but obviously the way the run game is structured is going to be very different than what it was in Baltimore. You know, the weapons are such a question mark. You know, how do they want to play? Like, everything about that situation, very curious about. It's actually going to be one of the first places I go. I'm going to Arizona first, but then I'm going to be spending 2 days with the Rams and the Chargers next week. And the Chargers are one of the teams that I just cannot wait to see even what practice looks like. You know, what practice feels like. I mean, just so many different elements to that.
Well, to your point about seeing if it's still possible to build your entire team's premise off, can I just beat your ass? Yeah. Because that's what they're going to try and do. Him and Greg Roman are hanging out in a freaking trailer park, for God's sakes. You know, Jesse Minter coming over there with all that fun DNA from the Michigan buzzsaw defense from last year that's supposed to mimic what we had in Baltimore, like how they fit those parts. I mean, I could have come in with the same question I've had every year, which is, can the Chargers offensive line stay healthy long enough for me to see how this looks? Like, you've now got, 3 first-round picks, 3 former first-round picks on that offensive line. that I all liked coming out of school when we're with Sean Slater. We've seen proof of concept in the NFL, but for Zion and now for Joe on the other side of this, if it could stay healthy enough, long enough to where Justin Herbert has real protection and, like you mentioned, structurally so much of a different design for the run game and then the play action game off it and all that stuff, to then see, hey, Ladd McConkey, can he do it in the NFL too? Like, we all just sat there, and I for a while laughed, like, there's no way a white dude named Ladd with 2 Ds is going to sauce dudes in the SEC, and he did routinely, so who knows?
This is going to be an experiment about how much coaching matters. The fact that this team purged talent, that Keenan Allen is gone, Ladd McConkey is probably their number 1 receiver. On defense, they bring back the edge guys, but there's so many questions about interior defensive line, linebacker, what's going on at corner. And I think that there's a pretty big contingent of people who believe that they're going to be competitive this year despite all of that. And that is solely a bet on Jim Harbaugh. Like, that's all that is. And I don't necessarily think that's misguided.
No, not even in the slightest. So I guess while we're like belching out other things that we had written down here too, the Bengals are going to be able to tackle this year. Like, I was amazed at how quickly, for all of the Lou Anarumo propaganda that we as a football community all preach, understandably, because that was just the talking point we got at some point. Like last year, the secondary that they revamped really had struggles tackling. Defensively up front, they had some things to change around. You mentioned, the moving of DJ Reader. Now, Sheldon Rankins, who was freaking awesome last year for the Texans up front, I mean, just raising holy hell for them, now moves over in that spot to go along with the beef they've amassed on the offensive line of scrimmage. Like, that's going to go a long way in deciding, like, hey, are we going to get back, in addition to healthy Joe Burrow, of this Bengals team going back and slotting their place right alongside Buffalo and Baltimore and Kansas City?
I was very curious about that defense when we did our lingering question series. We did one on every division, just like, what the hell happened to X last year when you don't really have time to study it? The Bengals defense was one of the things that I really wanted to look at, and what they got out of the middle of just the spine of the second and third level. What they got out of their safeties last year, and then the regression from the linebackers, bringing back Von Bell and bringing in Geno Stone. I think that was a declaration that this is never going to happen again. Like, they really were hoping that Nick Scott could be that guy for them as just a plug and play starter last year, and it never happened. And the same is true for Dax Hill. Like, it's not an accident that Dax Hill is getting moved positionally this year, because it did not work out for him at safety. So getting Von Bell back, and I heard a couple people say, like, maybe Von Bell's like a depth piece for them, that he's only making like $1 million. He's only making $1 million because the Panthers are paying his salary. Like, right. I think that he's going to be like a real player for them this year. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I can't imagine that he's not going to step in and be like a stabilizing force for them, because I think that's the whole point of bringing him back. Last thing about the Chargers I want to ask you about, how, like, can you see this clearly with Joe Alt? Like, are you like a Joe Alt guy? Like, how do you feel about him?
I feel pretty strongly about Joe, mostly because, like, with offensive linemen coming out of college, the way that college is structured and the way the NFL is structured in terms of time on the field, I put a premium on guys that are technically proficient enough coming out. Yeah. But he also matches that with gifts. Like, the guy's barely over 21 at this point. He's incredibly long. He's a guy that was, morphing from tight end to offensive lineman going into college, and all that stuff that we sell for, like, upside guys when you were, like, back in the day, like Lane Johnson morphing from all those things into one of the best athletes playing the position, and then getting to a place in Philadelphia and certainly Oklahoma before that molds it. But he's technically proficient enough, like, making the move or whatever the things people talked about. I thought he always had that in his bag. But no, I was going to be as hard on Joe coming out as anybody, because I always try and put the biases aside towards Notre Dame when analyzing prospects. And, when I look at Notre Dame O-linemen, I see Zach Martin. Like, that's the standard in my brain, because I played with Zach, and it's just not fair to anybody. But Joe, in addition to all the technical things, is just so big. Like, every once in a while, you're reminded, like, at some point, it just takes the defensive lineman way too long to get around the perimeter, because we have the long arms conversation with dudes all the time. There are plenty of long-armed players where you don't see it show up on tape. With Joe Alt, every pass pro rep is like watching someone little brother a guy, where you see the full extent of that wingspan, making life a living hell for defenders. And so all that stuff combined, he's scheme versatile. I have very few concerns about Joe making that move up. He'll continue to add size the way a guy like Mike McGlinchey did coming out and be able to anchor better in certain spots as he cleans up some hand stuff, but it's really nitpicky.
Excited to watch him play. I've got a couple more small ones, like who's going to be the Raiders quarterback? Where does a guy like Justin Simmons land? Some of the left tackles, but we could do this all day. So I don't think we have to belabor any of those. Mike Golic Jr., sincerely appreciate you coming to spend the time with us today. Tell people where they can hear, listen to, watch the stuff that you're doing right now.
Yes, Gojo and Golic, me and my dad, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network, our YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, all those. I think we're on Sling now, which is cool. Big Sling guy. I've always been. Don't ask anyone to tell you otherwise. They're lying. You can catch us there wherever you get your podcasts as well. It's available. But yeah, we're rocking and rolling, man. Excited like everybody else to get out of July and actually get into training camps reporting here. Going to be fun.
We are here. It's very exciting. You guys that do that 2 hours of live stuff every single day, you guys are built different, man. I truly don't know how you're able to do it.
I heard Greg Rosenthal now, they're doing NFL daily.
Yeah.
And he said, he's like, I didn't realize that daily is both a promise and a threat. I was like, man, I feel that in my bones.
I think we did 5 shows a week, maybe the second year of this show. And it was one of those things where we were going to do 4. And I was like, well, if we're going to do 4, we might as well do 5. And it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my entire career. So I've learned my lessons. I've gained some wisdom with age, but you guys are, again, you're better men than me. Mike, thank you very much for the time, my friend. We will chat with you very soon.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate it.